Welcome, good morning to everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Cynthia Pastor, Director of Economics of the Global Infrastructure Hub. We are very pleased to be back for the fourth webinar of New Deals, Funding Solutions for the Future of Infrastructure. This webinar will be focused on optimizing brownfield infrastructure assets, and we will spend a bit of time looking at examples of where economies have successfully optimized their existing infrastructure. As we consider brownfield infrastructure in both developed and emerging economies, it is clear that much of this infrastructure can be updated and modernized to be more inclusive, safe, and resilient. However, we all know that governments will continue to face truly unprecedented fiscal constraints as a result of the pandemic. Average public debt levels across the G20 countries at the end of 2020 were between 50% and 100% higher than they were following the global financial crisis. It is often more cost-effective and climate-friendly to update and improve brownfield infrastructure rather than building new completely assets. There are also opportunities through asset monetizations to use the proceeds of brownfield assets to build new infrastructure in historically underserved areas despite fiscal constraints. Investors have a strong preference for brownfield infrastructure assets given their proven abilities to generate cash flows. However, brownfield infrastructure also has its inherent risks. More extensive technical due diligence is required to examine the existing asset condition and to address the heightened scheduling and development risks during the construction. The two programs that we will be presented today are both in the transport sector and are perfect illustrations of all the key ingredients needed to optimize brownfield infrastructure projects. Let me briefly highlight two of these ingredients. First, comprehensive project preparation. The ability of the delivery agency to develop a bankable and investment-ready project is essential to attract private capital. Our latest infrastructure monitor report explores the channeling of funds to emerging economies to improve project preparation through the lenses of project preparation facilities. And I think you will find it interesting. And there, if you're interested in some details, you can join or use the link that my colleague Daniel is going to provide in the chat. The second ingredient is the opportunity for a sustainable transition. One of the main opportunities with brownfield infrastructure is to be more sustainable, as existing developed land is being used. The involvement of MDBs increases the opportunity to incorporate sustainable criteria into the procurement process and reduce the carbon impact of the existing infrastructure. The remarks of our panel today and both of the programs we'll be discussing will dive into these ingredients and other ingredients, and I know you will find this a really useful discussion. I would now like to introduce Edgar Sarabia, Principal IO PPP Transaction Advisory at the IFC, to speak about IFC's work in this area and introduce us to the panelists and programs for today.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm thrilled to be co-hosting this fourth webinar in the joint IFC GIH series of funding solutions for the future of infrastructure. We know that there are a large number of existing public infrastructure assets which are owned by municipal, state, and national governments around the world in sectors that are very critical to facilitate everyday life and mobility of people and goods. Many of these assets are in need of investment, additional investment to expand capacity, improve safety, improve environmental and social standards, and overall service accessibility and quality. Some of these assets also have business value that's non-negligible, and therefore they also offer governments that own those an opportunity to monetize some of that value upfront, even as they help to mobilize additional investment. And in today's date, in which governments are facing tight fiscal constraints, this can only help. At IFC, we believe there is a tremendous opportunity to work with and support both our private and public partners around the world to optimize the value of these brownfield assets by helping our partners find the right balance between maximizing that upfront monetization and the new investments to be mobilized for improvements. We invest both directly in cities and subnational entities and support private sector investors to bring capital and innovation to help address the complex and growing needs for green and sustainable infrastructure projects. But we also advise government clients in structuring and competitively procuring bankable infrastructure projects that can bring that needed private capital, but also the needed expertise and innovation to meet the objectives of governments, but also improve environmental, social, and safety standards. Today, we're honored to be joined by panelists from two groundbreaking programs which illustrate ways in which brownfield projects can be leveraged to attract capital, to attract private expertise and innovation, and also to contribute to public finances while improving the quality, safety, and access in a green and sustainable manner. These are the PIPA road concession in Brazil and landmark PPP, and part of the IFC program with the state of Sao Paulo, to leverage their brownfield road assets to attract significant private investment and expertise to address in a green and sustainable manner the needs and the safety of millions of road users, while at the same time generating significant concession fees for the state of Sao Paulo. And we have the Ukraine Cities Innovative Initiative for Sustainable Urban Infrastructure Investments, where we will focus on the city of Mariupol, Green Bus Urban Transport Initiative. And we will also listen from the leading European mobility platform, Bolt, in their efforts to address urban transport challenges and promote climate smart transportation in Ukraine. I'm thrilled to welcome our four panelists: Rodrigo Sarmento Barata, the Director for Infrastructure Affairs at ARTESP in Sao Paulo; Rafael Maia Alves with the Global Transport Group at IFC; Viktor Dovhan, the Deputy Minister of Infrastructure for European Integration between 2016 and 2019; and Yuliya Malich, the Public Policy Manager at Bolt. Thank you, and over to the panelists, please. I think panelists, let me just start by asking the first question of Rodrigo, and that is, Rodrigo, if you could briefly describe the PIPA road program and let us know why this program was so important for Sao Paulo.
So, hey Edgar, hey Cynthia, and first of all, thank GI Hub and IFC for the invitation and for the opportunity to discuss our road concession program with so qualified audience and qualified panelists. I'd like to start just to explain here, Edgar, that PIPA is more a project, a specific transaction than the whole program. Now, actually, PIPA is a project, a road concession transaction, a road concession project, which is comprised in São Paulo's a road concession program. And in a quick overview, we can say that São Paulo has a solid and stable road concession program with more than 20 years of experience and 20 currently in force concession agreements, which are managed and regulated by ARTESP, an independent regulatory agency, which I belong to. And ARTESP is also 20 years old and has much experience and track record in regulating transportation infrastructure, especially road concessions. So, and when you look to PIPA specifically, PIPA is a 1,200 kilometers road concession. So it was the biggest road concession transaction in Brazil by the time of its closing. It crosses kind of 62 municipalities within the state of São Paulo. Just to remember, São Paulo is a state of Brazil, so we are a subnational entity, and we have our own road concession program. And PIPA transaction has counts with something close to $3 billion in investments in these road stretches, kind of 14 billion Brazilian reais expected amount of investment. It's quite a lot. I think it's the biggest project also in terms of financial volume here in Brazil. And we expect to have directly benefited people in something like 2.8 million people, which will be directly benefited with the project. But of course, it also promotes a very important logistics corridor here in the state. So besides these 2.8 million directly benefited, we have lots of more people benefited from the project. But I think that maybe the key feature of this project and the reason for us to discuss this project today, it's the confirmation, it's the decision of a political and regulatory decision here in the state of São Paulo to guarantee the continuity and the maturity of our program, taking the concessions that are reaching to contractual end, because our first concessions were set up in the end of the 90s. So they reached its contractual end in 2020 and something like that. And we are taking these non-assets, so non-cash flow, non-traffic movement, to foster our program. So we are taking this non-assets to join up with other new road stretches and build concession projects, bigger concession projects, promoting investments in some places that if we look at alone, they would not be financially viable to perform concessions. So I think that our key feature here is this decision to promote programs continuity by joining recycle assets with new road stretches, promoting new investment to population and to our logistics network here in São Paulo. So in a nutshell, just to summarize our key important features here, specifically talking about PIPA project. First of all, it's the consolidation of the continuity and maturity of our road concession program, because it's the third concession, the third project, but the biggest one, which we are successfully doing this, recycling the assets and increasing our road network under concessions managed by private concessionaires. It also confirmed a very intelligent political and regulatory decision to focus in developing the program and increasing the investment instead of just collecting revenues for projects in projects auctions. Also, it was a very challenging project because we launched this project right before the eclosion of the pandemic of COVID-19. So the auction, between the auction and agreements execution, it was the most hard part here in Brazil of pandemic of COVID-19. So and we could guarantee the execution of the agreement even during the pandemic. So for us, it was a victory because we could maintain the project even with the pandemic. And finally, and we could discuss it further in more details, this project consolidated new improvements in regulatory features here in the agency, especially when talking about environmental policies like adopting IFC, ENS standards, and also to adopt kind of a program to incentive concessionaires to offset greenhouse gases emissions. So we had lots of improvements in regulatory features in the project. I think it's
Rodrigo, Rodrigo, maybe that takes us actually to the second question, right? Which you've partially answered already, but anything you'd like to highlight in terms of the policy environment in Brazil, or more specifically in the state of Sao Paulo, that you think facilitated this transaction actually reaching commercial close, right? You said it was done, the auction was held before the pandemic, but then the actual close took place during the pandemic. And then if you think about this, what would you like to see in other jurisdictions that perhaps, if they wanted to replicate something like this? Thank you.
Okay. And sorry for stepping in the next question, but I thought it was important to clarify some issues here. But I think the answer would be in the same sense of what I was talking before. I think that the key points here for the success of this transaction is this long-lived program that we have here in the state of São Paulo. So it's solid, it's stable, so it brings predictability for private investors in how we work with this kind of concession and this kind of agreements. And of course, having the agency, Artesp, acting as an independent regulatory agency, I think it's very important to promote this kind of security, this kind of solid track record and what we do and how we understand things related to the concessions. Also, I think the state of São Paulo, besides just road concessions, we have here lots of other public-private investment programs in other areas like sanitation, health, and mobility. And I think this the whole picture and the market comprehends the state of São Paulo with a good reputation in respecting and observing the agreements. So the past counts a lot when we are talking about a challenging new transaction. So all what was built during the past 20 years in consolidating our practice, I think it's one of the main features to bring success to the transaction. So we can say that São Paulo has a solid institutional framework, which I think it's one of the main points when we are talking about public-private relationships, long-term relationships at all. And finally, talking about specifically about this project, we counted with IFC support in modeling and promoting the project, and this support helped us to increase in transparency in disclosing information to the market, and especially to international players. So we disclosed friendly information for international players, because every time an international player comes to Brazil, maybe it needs to comprehend Brazil, to comprehend our legal framework. It's not so easy. So when we promote and disclose reliable and friendly information, it's always better to bring new investors to the project. We improved also in terms of documentation. We had a lot of strong work in the documentation, and also giving time, especially to foreign players, to prepare their proposals. So normally we see here in Brazil something like 60 to 90 days to a private player to submit a proposal in an auction, in an infrastructure project. And we start working, especially in this PIPA project, and we are trying to keep this initiative in other new projects with at least 120 days to the private player to receive the RFP and then submit the proposal. So we try to create a friendly and very transparent environment which cope with our track record and reputation from the past to promote this project. I think that's the main points. And thank you again, Edgar.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. Cynthia, if I could ask you to take over with the next panelist. Thank you.
Thank you, Edgar. So maybe I would like to ask Rafael Maia. Rafael, can you explain what innovative features to this transaction were crucial for its eventual success?
Of course. So firstly, thank you, Edgar. Thank you, Cynthia, and everyone for being here with us. and to discuss this interesting project and other interesting projects as well. So yeah, I guess that probably what we can say is that even though an established program, as Rodrigo is mentioning, with over 20 years of history, and even though in a traditional sector like toll roads, which were since the 90s being transferred, awarded to private entities here in Brazil, in the São Paulo and other programs in Brazil, the state did not settle. And I guess that happened under the belief that the overall environment changes with time, and that needs and expectations from users and from different stakeholders, they change with time as well. And then we believe that there is always room for improvement. There was room for improvement, and there will always be room for improvement. So when we sat down in the beginning of the program to plan what were our main guidelines and what we wanted to tackle with these new transactions, even before the PIPA program, but probably culminating in the PIPA program with the more maturity of this new generation of road projects. We sat down with the government and defined these main guidelines. And the main principle behind this was that we could recycle the existing assets and monetize these existing assets, bringing more investment to the state at the time of really a not very straightforward environment for bringing private investment into the state and into Brazil. So I would mention that these main principles would be to preserve the asset value, ensuring sponsor commitment, and enable this monetization. So basically, we use predefined tariffs. So we didn't use lowest tariff auctions, which politicians tend to want to implement in this program so that they can say that they are lowering the tariffs at X percentage and use this politically. So the government understood the need to run away from this kind of criteria so that it could really monetize and maintain the asset value. And with this, the auction criteria was the highest upfront concession fee, and the upfront concession fee would be payable with commercial closing. So with this, we were ensuring also that investors would be committed since day one with the project, not waiting for things to really materialize and for them to be comfortable in investing. So their clock was ticking since day one. And with this, we also thought we could attract more capable and more financially sound players to the project, which would entail a lot of investments. Another thing was a close look at the risk matrix of these projects according to specific features of each project. So what we needed really to protect and what we needed to tackle in each of the projects. So attention to the most important risks and probabilities, some automatic rebalancing mechanisms for the risks that were already known and could materialize and were predefined. Also, something that we took a lot of attention to improve was to reduce regulatory burden and the risk of litigation during the long-term contract. So basically, we did this with the revision of all the KPI framework, introduction of technology to facilitate supervision and approval processes, with like introduction of building information modeling for the designs, utilizations of independent certifiers, so that we could make the approval processes more swift from the agency's perspective. Also, bankability was always something that we took a lot of attention because we were in a scenario of credit restriction, difficulties in tapping different markets to raise funds for these projects. So increase bankability and also to attract new players to the game so that we could ensure competition in this project and create competitive tension so that we could bring more value for money for the state. So we revised the RFPs, so the terms of the request for proposal, so that we ended some historic barriers in the bidding rules for international players and for different profiles of players like asset managers and funds, so financial players. We introduced some foreign exchange protection mechanism in the project. We introduced the direct agreement to bring the lenders also to the game and to really improve the relationship between regulator, authority, lenders, and the investors themselves, so that the project could also benefit from this good relationship between all of them and this alignment. And of course, and probably the most important features of these programs were, at the end of the day, for the government was to improve user experience. So basically, we introduced several features in tariffs. So we introduced discounts for electronic payments to make the user experience in the roads more efficient as well, and more efficiency for the concessionaire. We introduced the frequent users discounts in the PIPA program, so that users that were frequent users and would commute between cities, because the concession is part of different cities, 62 cities, as Rodrigo mentioned. So we had a frequent user discount, and the introduction of IRAP, this road safety methodology, so that with this introduction, we could limit the number and reduce the severity of all accidents during the 30 years of the concession. So there are some provisions with road safety specific provisions, and as I don't need to repeat this, but we believe that we could elevate the social and environmental standards of the program. We bridged the gap between local legislation and the IFC performance standards, and introduced the zero carbon program, and also a new gender angle in the contractual provisions. So we included some provisions to prevent gender-based violence, some grievance mechanisms, and all sorts of mechanisms to improve the social and environmental standards.
Thank you, Rafael. And on the other side, what made investors so interested in this project? How do you define success in this regard?
Yeah, I guess that in this project, particularly in the environment that we were at the time, probably what made investors confident and comfortable in spending money and investing in studying the projects and bidding for the project was to understand that there was a balance between technical, financial, political, and social aspects embedded into the whole program. Because at the time that we were living with a lot of political tension, financial crisis, we knew that any noise from any aspects could jeopardize the whole program ability to bring new people to the game, and also could bring more scrutiny that would probably jeopardize the overall transaction structuring and jeopardize the schedule. And this tends to make investors not comfortable. So since the beginning, the government defined a communications program for the project that was based on the willingness to bring new investors and the willingness to increase competition in a market that was basically dominated by the same traditional players and construction companies. So the government introduced these communication programs to make sure for everyone that they wanted to bring new people to invest in the state of São Paulo. And with that, and with IFC, together with IFC, we defined a really intense process of market sounding. So having IFC as an independent third party supporting the government in structuring this project also made investors more confident that they would be heard, they could, and the technical aspects that they would bring to the projects in the consultations, they would be factored into the bidding documents and into the concession agreement in a technical way, also, and considering a balance between what the public needs and what the investors need to have a good project. Because at the end of the day, if either party is not happy with what has been put out to market, this will not work. This can work in the beginning, but in the long term, we will probably have problems. So, and also what we could say is that, as mentioned in the previous question, to work in the bidding rules and to make sure to everyone that we were eliminating barriers to new investors and to new profiles of investors in the program since the beginning, and communicating this to the market through intense market consultation, we could make this idea clear for everyone so that everyone could say, no, yeah, let's take a look at this. Let's study these projects. Let's spend money to put a proposal at the end of the day and join this new contract. And I guess that we can, now that the first projects, 4 projects were tendered, we can say that we had success, mainly because contracts are signed, concessionaires are operating, the PIPA concessionaire is operating, all the projects under the program are already had already gone through financial closing, and the investments are being made, the concessionaires are operating, generating income, jobs. The PIPA project, by the time of commercial closing, more than 2,000 jobs were already generated, just in commercial closing. And then now with the investments starting, we understand that more than 7,000 jobs will be created during the investment period. So this is already showing that the success in things happening even during a pandemic, and more specific victories of the government probably was to attract financial players, because 2 of the projects were won by asset managers, to attract international players, not only the ones that were already here in Brazil, but new players that have never been to the road sector here in Brazil. So the overall objective of attracting private financing and international private financing was achieved. And finally, I guess we could say that the success is always being shown by other projects in other jurisdictions, in other sectors, using the provisions and mechanisms that were included in these projects in new projects. So these things that we have implemented are being replicated, and probably they will continue to be improved in the long run, and we will always have better and better projects, and Brazil will hopefully be able to attract more and more international and private capital to the programs.
Thank you very much, Rafael and Rodrigo. Next, we are going to switch to the Ukraine city programs. And let me start with Viktor. Viktor, for the Mariupol public transport project, what were the main objectives and expected outcomes for the government? What in the enabling environment made this transaction a success?
Hi, colleagues. Sorry, I'm just traveling, so my connection is does not allow me to switch to the like video regime, but I would try to speak with you. With regard to the concessions, this mechanism is quite new for Ukraine. As you know, the law was adopted just a year ago, and 2 pilot projects implemented by our team in the ports. For the roads, and I would rather, be quite I don't know, disappointed with IFC, and because they proposed 6 pilot projects for Ukraine, and I would say it's a kind of, in my opinion, like humble expert opinion, it's quite difficult start, because they proposed big projects, billion projects, and we would like to start with some, like small with the high traffic, like we started with the ports. Yes, we did the tenders and feasibility together with IFC and the BRD for the small ports, and then we are like moving towards big ports. Ukrainians, they not get used to pay for the roads, right? And it's quite very politically sensitive topic in the media when the minister or the head of the Ukrainian road agency, they speak that we will start the concessions, and everybody's like, what? The roads will be not for free. So 6 projects which pre-feasibility was prepared by the IFC experts. They're like in the pipeline, but we are moving towards a completely different project, which is in the West, mitigating the risks from the Russian Federation, right? It's from the Polish border towards western city Lviv, which is my hometown, and then towards like Kiev direction towards Rivno. It's Ukrainian companies preparing the feasibility, like private initiative. As you know, it's possible according to Ukrainian legislation. And they hired Austrian consultants, and like they paid quite big amount of money for the feasibility. And I think in March, Prime Minister will maybe present some preliminary results, but it will be 3 stages, and the whole project is worth 1.4 billion. But again, we will start with the small, from the border towards regional city. So that's about the concessions. Airports concessions are as well in the pipeline, but because of the COVID limitations and this decrease of traffic, I don't think we're like in the position to find investors for the airports. And again, we want to propose small airports, regional airports. Investors would like to take Kyiv, Boryspil, and again Lviv, yes, as the 2 biggest state airports. So this is the issue. So yeah, I mean, the bottom line is that the president, the government, they understand that money from the state budget quite limited, and we need to attract private money. And the only mechanism to attract private money in the infrastructure projects, it's concession. So I mean, Ukraine is slowly but surely moves on.
And what lessons are you taking forward for future urban transport upgrade projects? What advice could you give us for other jurisdictions, maybe?
You mean the lessons we gained during the ports concessions, or what we just accomplished? Because we just accomplished two first pilot projects with the ports, right?
Yes.
Oh, the lessons. I mean, quite difficult was to persuade trade unions, first of all, because they're coming from the Soviet times, and this was quite an issue because they thought that the private investor was going completely, cut the staff and so on. Then it was quite difficult again to persuade the foreign companies to participate, because the first issue all the investors in Ukraine are mentioning is about rule of law and corruption, and it's quite difficult to say this for the first time we will do the fair competition, right, without all these games and so on. But we managed with the help of, again, we appreciate the help of IFC and TBRD. We did it, and I think the main lesson, we are too slow. Yeah, we're losing this tempo, and the investors are ready, but we are like trying, filing all these documents, and it take like ages, like 1 year to prepare the project. So maybe the main lesson should be that we need to involve private companies and to do all this bureaucracy stuff, all this filing very quickly, because again, Ukraine is just one country in the we compete globally. Yeah, we try to attract money. For instance, for Olvia port, it was Qatar terminal, right, from Qatar. For Kherson port, it was Georgian. Yeah, so completely different companies. So we need to be quick, efficient, and only in that case we can like win.
Thank you, Victor. I'll hand it over now to Edgar to continue asking the other panelists some questions.
Thank you, Cynthia. So Yuliya, looking at the efforts of Bolt in terms of urban mobility and platforms to facilitate urban transport. What do you think are some of the regulatory challenges that you're facing in Ukraine that you think could make private investment easier? But beyond Ukraine, maybe the region more broadly.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having both representative in the discussion, and great thanks to the IFC and the GI Hub for organizing such important panel discussion. So first, I would like to say a few words about Bolt. It's the European super app with the mission to make urban mobility more affordable, safe, and sustainable. Globally, it has more than 100 million customers and is present in more than 45 countries. If we are speaking about Ukraine, there are 3 business verticals present in Ukraine. It's ride-hailing, so carriage of passengers by car, e-scooters rentals, and food delivery. Regarding the regulatory challenges, I would say that the main are concentrated in ride-hailing and micromobility spheres. So as for the ride-hailing, according to the study conducted by one of the main think tanks in Ukraine, it's Kyiv School of Economics, today in Ukraine there are more than 300,000 drivers who provide services for the carriage of passengers by car. At the same time, almost 90% of the market is gray due to the fact that the current regulation does not correspond to the real market and doesn't take into account the fact that we have currently digitalization trend and new kind of businesses such as online platforms appeared. Today, there are some dialogues in the parliament and in the government regarding the new reform of the so-called taxi industry. The reform proposed considers that although drivers must be registered as individual private entrepreneurs, the tax agent for them will be directly online platforms. So such a reform option will have a smaller fiscal effect according to the economic analysis which I mentioned. In the view of this, we propose an alternative and simplified mechanism for registering drivers and administering the tax. As for the micromobility, key issue for sustainability of e-scooter rental services in Ukraine and beyond the region is lack of national regulation for use of personal electric vehicles. So they have indefinite legal status and there are no traffic rules approved on the national level. And such situation for sure results in increasing number of accidents, public disapproval of both users and the scooter rental services, and various policies not always favorable approved on the cities level. In this regard, in Ukraine, the draft law regarding the national regulation is being discussed, and it was already adopted in the first reading, but accidentally it's not being advocated further. So because the lack of the attention of the key stakeholders inside in the parliament, it's not going to the second reading. So answering your question, what would make investments easier? Prioritization of the key important issues in the parliaments and reassurance of today's situation that we take into account digitalization trends and increase the trend for increase in micromobility vehicles.
Thank you, Yuliya. Now turning a bit to green and this sustainable financing space, are you seeing any trends and what needs to be updated to make this possible in urban transport infrastructure?
Yeah. Globally, I think that every guest on this session can notice that the main problems in the cities are traffic, pollution, parking, accidents, lack of active life for the citizens. In response to that, 4 main trends in transportation occurred. First is electric vehicles, second, self-driving cars, third, personal electric vehicles, and fourth, shared infrastructure, like, for instance, car sharing, e-scooters, e-bikes, rentals. So what do you think? What are the most favorable for making cities better? For sure, most of the mentioned problems could be resolved by electric vehicles and shared infrastructure. To make positive changes to the transportation system as a whole, we have to use positive incentives, meaning creating dedicated lines for micromobility vehicles, and to, of course, support use of shared vehicles and not privately owned cars. Secondly, Bolt considers micromobility as an element of the mass transportation system in the cities. It plays a significant role in terms of sustainability for cities with heavy CO2 carbon emissions, I mean. Interesting fact here that Bolt was the first European platform to obtain the carbon neutral certification. It means that Bolt's European micromobility operations remove more carbon than they emit. So it's also an option of how we can decrease the carbon emissions in the cities, use of electric vehicles. So summarizing, in order to change the cities, what's needed? To support the products that offer better and more affordable alternatives to the privately owned cars, to partner partner with the cities, to share with the cities the data, and to help people make the switch towards electric vehicles. In this regard, in some cities, Bolt has tested the modal shift, which allows a user to choose between electric scooter and, for example, a ride-hailing option. So this all will help to transform urban areas back into sustainable, people-friendly spaces.
Thank you very much, Yuliya.
Thank you.
Cynthia?
Thank you, Edgar.
Thank you, Yuliya. Now we are going to open the floor for questions for the audience. And the first question that I'm going to ask Rafael is, Rafael, how do you deal with legacy issues with the existing brownfield infrastructures, like asset condition, etc.?
Okay. So in this project, since the first one, since we were dealing with asset transfer to a new incumbent, what we did and are improving in all the future contracts is that we have a due diligence period that needs to be undertaken by an independent verifier. So basically, an independent verifier is hired to undertake to develop a due diligence and to see if the asset transferred, the transferred asset conditions complies with the previous contract that is this ending, and also with the standards that needs to be achieved by the new concessionaire. And in case we have deviations between what needs to be operated by the new concessionaire, it will need to undertake some interventions to elevate the standards of these assets. So we have this asset transfer period. And what we do for this to mitigate also liquidity risks and cost overrun risks for the investor is that the upfront concession fee that is paid in commercial closing, it is transferred to an escrow account, and it stays, or the whole concession fee or part of the concession fee, depends on the project, it stays in this escrow account until the end of this due diligence period, so that after identified all the liabilities and all the interventions that will need to be done, the concessionaire have access to liquidity to undertake such interventions. So in summary, this is the mechanism.
Thanks, Rafael. We have a second question, this one for Rodrigo. So the question says that the pandemic must have impacted the expected number of users. Did this scenario cause a contractual renegotiation? Were there any other impacts of the pandemic?
Thank you, Edgar, for the question. And yeah, of course, the pandemic did impact the number of users in the road and in all the public services, increasing or decreasing. And this is an important thing to observe, because of course, health services were a lot of increased in demand, but also when we look to roads, when we have logistics corridors, we do not verify an obvious decrease in during the whole pandemic period. Of course, when it exploded, we have like a very strong decrease in traffic in the whole country, I think in the whole world. But when we are following this evolution during the whole pandemic, we see in some parts of the state, traffic's increasing like quite a lot, because all the need for new materials, and of course the e-commerce that also exploded here in Brazil after the pandemic, performed some relevant impacts in traffic in all the roads. So it did impact, and to deal with this situation, we as a regulatory agency and the government formally recognized the event of the pandemic of an extraordinary event, an event that we could not foresee anything of these effects. And this recognition was very important. It was right in the beginning of the pandemic, and it enabled us to have a very careful analysis on the whole impacts and to work and its probable results. So talking about roads, the road sector here are regulated by Artesp. We are still following and studying the effects of the pandemic, and we did not started any kind of, we call it rebalancing here in Brazil. It's a previous established procedure to reset the balance of the concession agreement. And we did not conclude any kind of analysis, but we want to. And the point was that when there's no short-term cash constraints that could hinder or severely impact concessionaires' operation or investments, we prefer to see the event as a whole. So the whole impact of the pandemic to give a consolidated response. So we still studying the impacts of the pandemic in all the roads of the state of São Paulo, to see and to understand what was effectively extraordinary. We have to understand which kind of oscillation in this traffic was in fact extraordinary, and if this, if you can verify a decrease in traffic and in an extraordinary manner, we will have to do the rebalancing of the agreement and compensate the concessionaire. But we're still studying. Just to have a comparison, for instance, the airport sector here in Brazil, which is regulated by the federal government, all the airport operators had very severe restrictions because the air flights were totally canceled. So the other regulatory agency, which is in charge of airports, had to do like emergency remedies to support this kind of concessionaire cash flows. In the roads, we did not realize this kind of situation. So we are still studying and trying to figure out the way to give the response as a whole to the whole sector.
Thank you, Rodrigo. The third question goes for Yuliya. What can the federal government do to incentivize improvements in urban mobility?
Yeah, speaking about incentives, I should admit that there are different layers of the problem. So the first is that a national regulation on the level of the government should be adopted. That's first. But second, often cities themselves, so city authorities do or do not something regarding micromobilities. So what could be done in this regard? For example, national strategy on micromobility could be elaborated and then widespread to the cities authorities. So this could be like a roadmap for the cities to implement. Then the federal government could organize some working groups consists of the city mayors from the different regions, which could cooperate with each other and discuss what would be the best options in terms of the development of micromobility and how to develop infrastructure, how to build special places for the micromobility infrastructure. I mean the lanes for bicycles, lanes for e-scooters, e-bikes, etc. Because nowadays, for example, in Ukraine and of course in other countries in the region, there is lack of infrastructure. That's why there is a question where a user can drive the e-scooter or e-bike. Of course, it's not safe to ride it on the road. But of course, it's also dangerous to be on the public lane. That's why the incentive should be targeted at the development of infrastructure, and public discussions and national micromobility strategy should be targeted at the development of infrastructure at first.
Thanks a lot, Yuliya. Conscious of time, I think we have 2 minutes left, so I'm sure we could spend the next hour talking about this, but let me just try to wrap up from my side to thank all the panelists and to thank the interest of the audience with some of the questions they've asked. I guess really in closing, it is true that brownfield assets have their own set of challenges and issues that need to be taken into account, like the state of the assets, who's liable for what, etc. But I think when you're looking at transportation assets, they offer a unique opportunity to actually achieve both the objective of making additional investments, mobilizing additional private capital and additional innovations, and at the same time being able to ensure that those assets do not deteriorate over time and are actually always in good shape. So it is challenging, but I think because in places like Brazil, where there are established traffic patterns, there's a culture already of paying tolls, it removes a lot of other constraints that are typically present in greenfield assets. So I would say on balance, it is worth taking a strong look at this. The value of these assets around the world is tremendous, and the needs for investments are huge. So I would encourage others to look at that. With that, let me turn it over to Cynthia.
Thank you, Edgar. With that, we are closing our event. Thank you everyone for attending, especially Edgar for joining us, and to all of the speakers that shared their successful experiences and recommendations. Thank you to everyone and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.